Join me at John 12. In the area where I grew up in western Nebraska, there is a geographical consistency of bluffs that run a few miles around the town that I grew up in, and one of those towns is labeled with a bluff. Scott's Bluff is the name of the town. Hiram Scott was an explorer, and he was killed there. He died in that area, and they named it after him, Scott's Bluff. And it is a beautiful area. I know you've got it. If you haven't been there, you have to Google it, look it up. How could Nebraska be beautiful? It's gorgeous. It really is pretty. It's especially pretty, and snow comes. It's just really rustic but inviting. If it's a wet spring, greenery comes up an emerald green color that it's almost as if there's this blanket flown over this bluff, and it's very pretty. It's fairly high on a geographical region that's flat. So you see it from a while, and coming into town, you see it there. You can climb this bluff and drive up it as well. And at the top of the bluff, there's a series of pathways, about a mile of pathways that you can walk. There are extensions off of the bluff here and there. And you can see in a distance, you can see it seems like quite a ways. In fact, one corner of the bluff, the northwest facing corner, there is a pay-for binocular. Put a quarter in and you can look through and see. And you can see Laramie Peak. You can see into Wyoming. And tell people, I was western Nebraska, how far west? You could ride your bike into it. You can see into Wyoming on the top of this bluff. You can see a long way into Wyoming. And it's, on a clear day, it's fascinating to be able to look. I can see hundreds of miles on a clear day. Now, same clear day, if I walk away from that mechanism, the view through which I'm looking westward, I can't see it at all. I can see Fort Mitchell down below. I might be able to see into the town of Mitchell. There's a granary there. I can maybe see this highway that goes up. Some of you have been in this region. You can see some fields, some other bluffs over on this side. But if I go over and put my quarter in on a clear day, I can see Laramie Peak. If you're looking that way, the center point through which you're going to look is this pay-for binoculars. How will you view 2025? How will we view the circumstances of 2025? If we look through the grid, the mechanism of a Christian worldview, I think we're going to be able to see clearly. Outside of that, not so much. And you're already off on the right foot. You are showing it by your participation here today. I'm adjusting my schedule. I could just take the week off, but I want to be with God's people. I want to hear singing. I want to hear the Word. I want to participate in the Lord's Supper. I've heard it said that when you are leading or teaching people, it's much less frequently the case that you're really giving them new information as opposed to reminding them of what they already know and calling them to it. It's that latter idea that we're at today. You being here shows that a Christian worldview, looking through that lens at the future, is exactly what you want to do. You're starting 2025 on the right foot, if you will, and that's where we're at today. When we look at John 12 today, there are two ways in which the timing is different. One we've stated already, it's a Saturday, it's not Sunday. Just this morning I said, how was your Saturday to someone? It's just started, he said, because normally I ask that kind of a question on Sunday. So the timing is different, but the timing is also different in the macro, because just looking there at your Bible, when is this passage often referenced? It's Palm Sunday. Yeah, it's getting ready for Easter week, Holy Week. Not the Sunday after Christmas, a couple of weeks after. That's where we find ourselves in the flow of the Gospel of John here in chapter 12. And my hope today is that because the timing is different in terms of day of the week, the timing is different in terms of when we might expect this passage to be on our minds in the calendar year, I'm trusting that we see it afresh. I'm trusting that through it, we can see 2025. This passage can help us think about the Christian worldview, the binoculars, if you will, by which we will look ahead to 2025 and by it interpret the circumstances of life. This is one way, if you are not a believer here today, you haven't been baptized and made a profession of faith, this is one way you will know when you are converted. You're seeking, I'm just not sure if I'm a Christian yet. One way you will know is that you begin instinctively, because of being born again by the Spirit, coming to the end of yourself, realizing your situation is so bad you need a complete restart. I got to have a new birth. I don't need just a new plan. I need a new insight, a new mindset. When someone is converted, they begin to look at their circumstances through the message of Christianity and not the other way around. Not looking at Christianity through their circumstances. It's no longer a bartering with God. This may have been the characteristic of your life. I'm going to look at God through the circumstances of my life. And everything then becomes a barter. If you'll do this, God, I'll do this. If this happens, God, I'll seek you. Everything's this bartering game because you're looking at God through circumstances. Someone's goal is getting by, getting ahead, make sure they're not getting left out. So they view God that way. He's essentially a genie in a bottle. The difference with the Christian worldview is someone who's born again, I'm going to now view the circumstances of life through God. He's what I'm looking through to this year. The living God, not just a set series of ideas, but the living God. I'm looking through Him to the future and to the circumstances of my work, my family, my health, my entire situation. One of the saddest moments for Julie and me last year was talking with various people, and one of them challenging the situation for them. Do I choose work or do I choose God? We're trying to evangelize this person. And I don't get why I should choose church fellowship and adjust my work schedule and lose money simply for the sake of going to church. There you have it. You're viewing God in light of your circumstances and not your circumstances in light of God. Seek first the kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be given to you. And you'll find that. You'll find greater fulfillment, greater satisfaction in this way. Because we're talking about reality here. Jesus has come. He is the center. So, it's foolishness to go wandering around at the top of Scotts Bluff. I'm looking for the destination. Where's Laramie Peak? Listen, you will never see it unless you go to the northwest corner and put your quarter in, and then you can see it on a clear day. I invite you to come and see the world through Jesus, through what God has promised, through the power of the Spirit and the glory of the local church. This is what I call you to today. We're asking the question, what reason do we have to actually trust God in the circumstances? We look through this, we're going to have reason. And we're going to gather this up, these bigger worldview ideas, from a scene that is fairly familiar to you. I trust that many of you have read the Bible before you. This is a familiar scene. I want to gather up two ideas from it. I want us to think about fulfillment in Jesus and His own words about fulfillment, Mary's actions contra Judas's here. And then I want to think with you about this crowd that has gathered after Lazarus has been raised from the dead. Now they've come to Bethany, where Lazarus is from, and they are gathered around, and what this means for understanding the world in which we live and creation itself. There's a connection between this crowd and how the Jewish leadership views creation, views the entire world, cosmos. Gather these principles up, and along the way, we'll think about how this passage, the structures that are here, these events, contribute even to passages in the New Testament epistles, like Paul's frame of thought in Colossians 1 and 2 and 3. Just his flow of thought just comes from these kinds of principles that we will follow in John 12. We are just here after the resurrection of Lazarus, and we're now looking at what follows after the resurrection of Lazarus. Remember, a crowd had seen him come out, and at the end of John 11, I think the end of John 11 is perhaps the most important passage in the New Testament to help us understand the political, religious situation that Jesus walked into when He was born. How it developed in His lifetime and how He challenged it. After Lazarus is raised, this crowd goes to the Jewish leadership, and along the way they have opposed Jesus. Directly from John 5 on, after He told the man lame to get up and walk and carry his bedroll, from that point on, Jesus was in the crosshairs of the Jewish leadership, and now it's reached a crescendo with this resurrection of Lazarus. And they've gone, and the Sanhedrin, the Jewish official council, has gathered together, and they have made a decision to put away Jesus, to do away with Him, because if they don't, their own nation is going to perish. Their agreement with Rome, the peacekeeping mechanisms that practices like the Sabbath and food laws and these kinds of things kept with Rome, all of these are challenged by Jesus. So they have to do away with Him, because if they don't do away with Him, the Romans will do away with them. And in their mind, it's an either or. It's not a both and. This is an either or. So we've got to do away with Him. Scene goes to black. We pick it back up in chapter 12. That's right where we find ourselves. And what I want to notice with you is God's redemptive plan here in verses 1 through 8. And we understand that redemptive plan through Mary's actions, through Judas's actions, and through Jesus' actions. Let's look at them one by one. Verses 1 through 3. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, the one Jesus had raised from the dead. So they gave a dinner for him there. Martha was serving them. Lazarus was one of those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took a pound of fragrant oil, pure and expensive nard, anointed Jesus' feet, wiped his feet with her hair. So the house was filled with the fragrance of the oil. I hope you had some good holiday gatherings this last year. I had some even this last week. I was just looking back this last week. I had parties multiple nights of the week, gatherings, and they were all so fun and encouraging to be together. Maybe you've been to a really big gala at some point in your life, an official kind of meal. Maybe the food at a wedding that was formal. Maybe a banquet for a work event. But there's never been a banquet like this. This guy, days ago, was wrapped up dead. And now he's sitting and he's eating beside you. I bet people once in a while walked up and poked him. It's really you, man. You're here. It's really happened. You can imagine the joy in a parallel situation. Perhaps you've had a loved one who was ill or sick or in the hospital, maybe for an extended period of time, and God was gracious and they got better. And you sat around a table with them and ate. How did you feel? You're here. Yeah, we're here. Maybe it was a holiday kind of meal and they're back. Feeling good. We're here. Let's just pause and let Mary's actions here remind us of what the kingdom of God is and how it's portrayed in many places in Scripture. It's just this. Those who have experienced the resurrection because of Jesus in a banquet environment, that's the kingdom. Jesus uses that very imagery in Matthew 22. Let me tell you about the kingdom. Over and over, Jesus' parables about the kingdom, and one of them is a wedding banquet. And in this banquet, there is a great feast thrown, and there's only a select group of people who were invited. And those who were invited must react appropriately in their attire. And this, brothers and sisters, this is the grid of the kingdom. It is a banquet. It is a feast for those God has chosen who have responded faithfully, and here we are together. This is a portrait of eternity. And when we gather here now, it is a foretaste, it is an appetizer of what is to come. This is consistent in the New Testament. In Hebrews, consider Hebrews chapter 12. You've not come to what could be touched, to a blazing fire, darkness, gloom, and storm, the blast of a trumpet. You've not come to Sinai. Instead, you've come to Mount Zion. Listen to the language. To the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, to myriads of angels in festive gathering. That's a banquet. To the assembly of the firstborn whose names have been written in heaven, to God, who is the judge of all, to the spirits of righteous people made perfect, to Jesus, mediator of a new covenant, and the sprinkled blood which says better things than the blood of Abel. We can go all the way to the last book of the Bible and toward the end in Revelation 19 when heaven is described as a wedding feast, a banquet. There we are. This is Mary's reaction to her brother being raised to help her sister Martha throw this banquet and anoint Jesus. And it's the right thing that they would empty the bank account to celebrate. Wouldn't you do this? If someone you loved passed away and somehow some physician brought them back, you'd throw a party for that doctor. You might even empty the bank. I want to celebrate. Lazarus, raised from the dead by the Son of God, who claims to be the resurrection and the life. They are feasting and celebrating this. But verse 4, notice a different reaction. Judas, you're familiar with this. He speaks. It's interesting that the first words recorded spoken in this great scene are words of skepticism, doubt, and greed. Why wasn't this fragrant oil sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor? Do you realize Judas' hubris here? This isn't even the common money bag that John's going to refer to in a moment. Remember, Judas said this because he would take from the common money bag that was used for the itinerant ministry of Jesus and the 12. He's wanting to steal from Mary's savings for this celebration. He would even take from her. Why wasn't this sold? If he could, he'd even take from them. He didn't care about the poor. Rather, he would take it for himself if he could. If he was somehow in charge even of their financial resources, if he had access to their PIN numbers, let me tell you, he would be emptying that bank account. It would be his. And verses 7 and 8. We've seen two reactions here, an action and a reaction. I should say Mary and her action to Jesus, Judas' reaction, and now Jesus' interpretation of these events. And this is where we understand Jesus setting out what he would have for us as a worldview with himself at the very center, the redemptive purposes of God. This is Jesus telling us to go look through those, but not, come look through me. Notice the language here. Verse 7, leave her alone. She has kept it for the day of my burial. That should stop us. When has Jesus been talking about his burial? Fascinating, he's talking about a burial in the presence of one who was previously buried, in a sense. He's in the tomb. Oh. Jesus' interpretation of this whole scene is his mission as the eternal Son of God come into time. He interprets this for Judas directly, but not just for Judas directly. Jesus takes Judas' greedy statement and uses it to explain his mission. That's an aggressive worldview. I'm going to take this situation, I'm going to use it to explain reality. She actually did this to prepare for my burial. What's on Jesus' mind? It's what's to come in Jerusalem on what we celebrate as Good Friday and Resurrection Sunday. His death and his resurrection. And he is interpreting her action in light of that. She's actually doing it for a purpose you don't understand yet. But I want you to, for my burial. You will always have the poor with you. You do not always have me. Do you see the contrast here? Don't use the contrast to sort of minimize the need to care for the poor. That's throughout the New Testament. Jesus is making a specific point about his supremacy, the centrality of his redemptive mission, his determination to fulfill it, even to the degree that the circumstances of this banquet now must be understood, not just in light of Lazarus, but in light of his own death and resurrection. The culminating voice is Jesus here, interpreting the whole scene now in light of himself. It's not just this festive banquet for Lazarus. Lazarus will die. It's an opportunity to express his centrality. And that fact is what we see in the next scene. Everything is beginning to rotate around Jesus. Every scene in John's Gospel, there are various characters involved. Sometimes those characters get a bit more attention, sometimes less. Here, this scene in John 12 begins with Lazarus as the center point. It ends with Jesus, and Jesus as the center point is a great problem for the Jewish leadership. And that's where we're at. There's a sense in which the Jewish leadership gets it half right. Their interpretation of all that Jesus is doing is partly correct. He is a great threat to them. He really has come to overthrow their expectations. In one sense, they're entirely right to try to do away with him in light of their worldview and grid, because, as is on the screen in the bulletin before you, their understanding, listen, this is important, their understanding of creation itself is God's glory in His people, in His land, in Jerusalem, in the temple, with the nation of Israel distinct from the other nations flocking to Israel to show God's glory and to join them in that way because they are the descendants of Abraham. This has been God's purposes in all of creation. History itself is about us here. The Jewish leadership finds themselves pressured from themselves to maintain that in their short-sightedness, their selfishness even. J.B. Phillips, I've quoted him before in his excellent book, Your God is Too Small, capturing the way that the Jewish leadership would understand Jesus and him as a threat. Speaking about Jesus coming into the world and his ministry, J.B. Phillips says this, "Indeed, just because this is it, real truth, real goodness, real beauty, real God focused in human form, it is not unreasonable to imagine that all the truth-hating and self-loving spiritual powers will join forces against this unwelcome intruder. Misrepresentation, slander, the dead weight of age-long custom and authority false propaganda, all these weapons will be used against him. If this happened, it would, of course, be an ironical situation without parallel in the history of the world. God plans and engineers a personal visit to His own world, and the reaction of the world is to get rid of Him. And that is exactly what we see the Jewish leadership trying to do. But not only Jesus. Verse 9. A large crowd of the Jews learned that Jesus was there in Bethany at this, what had become a banquet. And they came not only because of Jesus, but also to see, they wanted to poke Him as well. Does this food taste different now after you've been raised from the dead? Is this fish, is it the same flavor? Verse 10. Therefore, the chief priests decided to also kill Lazarus. Here's why. Because their understanding of the very purposes of creation itself was God's people in God's land with the temple, them in charge. We are different than every other people. This is God's glory. This is us. And He's threatening that. And now He's bringing other people back from the dead. They're a threat too. The circumstances of life, they're partly correct. They're interpreting the circumstances of life around Jesus, and they want to do away with Him. But for you who understand Jesus, you want to interpret the circumstances of life around Him as well. Because He's God, come near. Verse 11, verses 10 and 11 together. The chief priests decided also to kill Lazarus because he was the reason many of the Jews were deserting them and believing in Jesus, were departing from Judaism and going to follow Jesus. And if your perspective of creation itself and history is we, as the descendants of Abraham, in this land, with the temple, God's glory here, separated by Sabbath, separated by what we eat, separated by other customs, if that's your grid and Jesus comes overthrowing that, you've got to get rid of Him. He's public enemy number one. He must be removed from the scene. And all the more so if people are going after Him. Because if people go after Him, in their understanding, the very purposes of creation will not be fulfilled. The very purposes of our lives. And we should see the language in terms of an increasing number of people. You've seen crowds gather. Sometimes crowds can maybe assemble more slowly. Sometimes they can gather fairly rapidly. That's what we should see here. It's that fairly rapid. Now, we know there was a crowd earlier, shortly after, immediately when Lazarus came out. In John 11, we read some went right away to the Jewish leadership. Here we should see a fairly quick gathering, perhaps over a few hours, more and more people coming, more and more people assembling. The language, F.F. Bruce catches it in this way. The expression, we're going and believing in Jesus, may be something like, we're increasingly believing in Jesus. It was happening quickly. More and more people, therefore a greater threat. If you believe you're driving the vehicle that is the vehicle in accord with the very purposes of creation, and someone comes along in the way, you would need to remove them. And that's the Jewish leadership. But what if that someone in the way is the very purpose of creation? What if that someone in the way is the Creator? What if that someone in the way is God? You're not going to be able to get rid of him. This is exactly what Gamaliel says in Acts 5. If you oppose these people, you may just be opposing God. So, friend, on the first Sunday of 2025, are you really going to fight against God? He's the center point. If you don't know him, come. For you who do, you're here today, again, I'm not giving you new information. I'm reminding you and encouraging you in it. Let's together look at the world this year through this. Paul, I think the grid I've established here, he just lets it loose on the issues of life in Colossians. Just consider Colossians 1. Walk worthy. You're memorizing this. No excuses, guys. We're working on it. Colossians 1:15. Jesus is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation, because by him everything was created. In heaven, on earth, visible, invisible, thrones, dominions, rulers, authority, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and by him all things hold together. Paul's going to walk through various issues of life, relationships, morals, family, work, all of these rotating around this center point. All the circumstances that everyday humans face right around Christ. At the hinge of Colossians chapter 3, verses 1 through 4, if then you've been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above. Set your heart on things above, where Christ is at the right hand. Set your mind on things above, not on things on the earth, for you died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, you'll appear with him in glory. The move that Paul makes beyond what Jesus has stated here and what we've gathered up from John 12 that is fulfilled later in John's Gospel is that when Jesus died, all those who believe in him died, and when he came out, so did you. The great difference between Lazarus going in and coming out and Jesus going in and coming out is Lazarus went in and came out alone. Jesus went in and came out with you who believe. You were with him. That's what God has done. You died with him, you were buried with him, and you came out with him. It's in light of that promise that we come to 2025, that we look through the grid of Jesus this year, and we celebrate by participating in the Lord's Supper today. If the musicians from the chorale would join us.